They used my name for years, so I used the police. Then I walked away with everything. They used my name for their bills, so I used the police to end their game. Then I opened my mailbox and saw a $12,000 electricity bill for a house I didn't live in. I laughed at first, until I realized they'd been using my name for years, and I never saw it coming. My name is Barbara Elkins. I'm 67 years old, retired after 32 years as a postal clerk, and I live in a quiet corner of Toledo, Ohio, in a modest 2-bedroom home filled with memories, and until recently, a whole lot of trust. Too much trust, as it turns out. I don't live extravagantly. I've always been practical, clipping coupons, baking my own bread, watching the sales flyers like it was a sport. That's how I managed to retire without debt. So imagine my confusion when the power company called me up one Monday morning and said, "Ma'am, your account's past due again. $12,048.57. We'll have to shut it off unless we receive payment this week." At first, I thought it was a scam, but when I asked for the address associated with the account, my stomach dropped. It wasn't my house. It was my nephew Jason's address. Jason, who'd been living with his girlfriend a couple towns over. Jason, who had called me 3 years ago asking if he could use my name for a phone line just to get a better deal. "Just temporary, Aunt B," he'd said. "You've got the cleanest credit in the family." Apparently, it hadn't stopped at a phone line. I went digging. I pulled my credit report, and what I saw nearly knocked the wind out of me. 3 utility accounts, 2 cable bills, a maxed-out credit card from a furniture store I'd never set foot in. All opened in my name. All linked to either Jason or his sister, Alyssa, my other niece. They'd used me. Not once, not by accident, but over and over, quietly, while smiling in my face every Thanksgiving, every birthday. I didn't know how to feel, embarrassed, betrayed, stupid. I'd always believed family meant you looked out for each other. I didn't have kids of my own. Jason and Alyssa were the closest I had. I helped raise them after my sister passed. I even co-signed Jason's first car loan, paid Alyssa's nursing school enrollment fee when she couldn't afford it. And this is what I got in return. I stared at the stack of bills on my table that night, trying to decide what to do. My first instinct was to call them, give them a chance to explain, to own up. But deep down, I knew what would happen. Denial, gaslighting, maybe even turning it back on me like I was overreacting. So instead, I called the one number I never thought I'd dial on my own flesh and blood: the police. But this wasn't just about a call. This was going to be a case, and I needed proof. I needed to play this smart. Over the next week, I became a woman on a mission. I kept every letter, printed every statement, even visited the utility offices in person to request confirmation of names, dates, and addresses. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just collected everything like I was building a case file, because I was. And when I handed that folder to the detective assigned to my case, he looked up at me and said something I'll never forget. "This isn't just fraud. Ms. Elkins, this is identity theft, and you've been their target for years." That was the moment something inside me hardened. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the truth. About how people you love can lie straight through their teeth and still come over for dinner. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to take everything they built with my name and light a legal fire under it. Because they weren't just going to pay back the money. They were going to pay for every single lie. The first time I saw Jason after I filed the police report, I nearly laughed at the performance he gave me. He showed up at my front door like nothing was wrong, grinning, arms wide open, smelling like that awful cologne he's worn since college. "Aunt B, I was just driving through the neighborhood, thought I'd pop in," he said, like I hadn't been handed a folder full of his lies just 2 days earlier. I invited him in, calmly, offered him tea, sat across from him in my living room as if I didn't have an entire police report on my kitchen counter, and then I said it, slowly, clearly. Jason, the electric company called, and so did the credit card company. You've been using my name. He blinked, like he didn't hear me, then laughed nervously. What? No, Aunt B, come on. You know we'd never do that to you. We. He didn't even realize he'd slipped. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch long enough for him to get uncomfortable. He looked around the room like the walls were about to come alive and accuse him. And I realized, right then, he wasn't sorry. He was scared, but not of what he'd done, of getting caught. I saw the bills, Jason, I said, my voice steady. The addresses, the credit report. I gave it all to the police. He stood up fast, knocking the coffee table slightly. Wait, you went to the cops? His eyes darted like a cornered animal. You didn't even talk to me first? You think I'm some kind of criminal? I looked at him, really looked at him. 34 years old, still borrowing money from relatives, still blaming the world for every mistake. No, Jason, I said. I think you made me your bank, and now you're mad the bank closed. He stormed out, slammed the door so hard my framed wedding photo rattled on the shelf. I didn't move. I didn't chase him. I just stared at the door and felt a wave of peace roll over me. Because the old Barbara? She would have begged him to explain, would have let guilt and loyalty cloud her judgment. But that woman was gone. The woman sitting in that armchair now had nothing left to lose and everything to gain by standing up. Later that night, I got a text from Alyssa. I heard you called the police. Seriously? This is family. Why would you try to ruin our lives over some bills? I didn't even reply. I just added the message to the growing file. Because this wasn't just about bills. This was about betrayal. Willful, long-term betrayal, by people who once called me their second mother. The detective, Detective Owens, called me the next morning. He said he'd spoken to both Jason and Alyssa. Jason hung up. Alyssa cried and tried to claim she didn't know anything about it. They're going to try to turn this around on you, he warned. Say you gave them permission. Say you were confused or senile. We see this a lot with elder fraud cases. That word hit hard. Elder, like I was some fragile thing to be pitied. But Owens wasn't wrong. They were going to play every card they had. Guilt, gaslighting, fake concern. And I had to be ready. I spent the next few days getting everything in order. I froze my credit, closed accounts, spoke to a financial advisor about locking things down permanently. I even bought a small safe and kept it under my bed. Inside it, every piece of evidence, every printed message, every threatening voicemail. Because they were coming for me now. Not with fists, but with guilt, with whispers to family members, with twisted stories about how I was losing it, how I'd always been too emotional. But I had something they didn't. The truth. And I was just getting started. If betrayal has a voice, it sounds like your own blood calling you senile. The words reached me through my cousin Carol, who lived 2 states away in Indiana. She called me one afternoon, her voice low and cautious. Barb, Jason called me, said you're having memory problems, that you might be overreacting. He seemed really worried. I closed my eyes. There it was, the script, the one people use when they're caught red-handed. Make the accuser look unstable. Paint them as emotional, confused, fragile, especially if they're older, especially if they're women. Carol, I said, I'm not confused. I'm furious. And if Jason's so worried, he can explain why I found 6 overdue accounts in my name. Silence, then a shaky breath on the other end. I had no idea, Barb. Of course she didn't, because they knew exactly who to keep in the dark, and who would believe them. I was alone out here. No husband anymore, no kids, just me. And that made me the perfect target. Easy to manipulate, easy to dismiss, easy to use. But not anymore. A week after the police began their investigation, Detective Owens called again. They'd subpoenaed the account information for every utility and credit line tied to my name. The documents were damning. Applications filled out in my name, but with Jason's handwriting. Addresses belonging to Alyssa. Phone numbers linked to both of them. Even a copy of my signature, forged so sloppily it looked like a child had written it with their left hand. They've been doing this for at least 4 years, Owens said. Maybe longer. 4 years. 4 years of phone lines, electricity, internet, shopping sprees, while I clipped coupons and reused foil to save money. 4 years of holiday hugs and fake thank yous while they smiled and drained me dry behind my back. When I hung up the phone, I didn't cry. I made a list. I started calling every single institution where my name had been used. I sent letters, filed disputes, reported fraud, sat on hold for hours, writing notes in a legal pad until my hands cramped. I kept a journal too, documenting everything, every phone call, every email, every interaction. Because I wasn't going to be the forgotten aunt who got confused. I was going to be the woman who remembered everything and made sure the system remembered too. That weekend, I went to my church, not for prayer, but for the bulletin board in the fellowship hall. I posted a warning with my name, a brief note about identity theft, and a list of phone numbers for reporting fraud. Some people looked at me funny. A few avoided my eye. But one woman, Diane, took my hand and said, "My grandson did the same." To me, I never told a soul. I hugged her. I understood. This wasn't just my story. It was a story so many women like me carried quietly, out of shame, out of fear that no one would believe us, that we'd be seen as bitter or forgetful. But silence protects the wrong people. Not anymore. A few days later, a letter arrived from the city court. Jason and Alyssa had been summoned. They were being charged. Felony identity theft. I held the paper in my hands, heart pounding, not with joy, but with justice. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about recognition, about showing them and myself that I wasn't powerless. Not confused, not emotional, not their victim anymore. The courthouse in Lucas County was colder than I remembered. It wasn't the weather. It was the way people looked at me when I walked in, as if they couldn't decide whether I was the poor old woman who got duped or the heartless aunt dragging her family through the mud. Jason and Alyssa sat on the opposite side of the courtroom. He wore a borrowed suit, one I recognized from my late husband's closet, oddly enough. Alyssa looked like she had come from church, hands folded demurely, mascara streaks smudging just right to make her look pitiful. Their lawyer tried the usual act. He said they were young and desperate, that misunderstandings happen within families, that I had initially given verbal permission, and now I was simply forgetting. That word again. Forgetting. As if I didn't have timestamps, bank letters, voice recordings, a folder thicker than a dictionary, dated, signed, sealed. When I was called to the stand, I didn't look at them. I looked at the judge. I spoke plainly, clearly. No dramatics, just the facts. I never gave permission for them to open those accounts, I said. I never signed those applications. They used my name, they used my credit, and they used my silence. The prosecutor handed the judge the file I'd built from scratch. The judge skimmed, lips pressed into a hard line. Then it was Alyssa's turn. She cried. She said she was just helping Jason, that she thought I knew, that maybe I'd said yes during the holidays when everyone was drinking wine and laughing, that she'd always seen me as a second mom. And I almost believed her. But you don't accidentally forge someone's signature. You don't accidentally use someone's name to get 6 months of free internet and a leather couch. Jason, for his part, barely spoke. He crossed his arms and glared at me like I was ruining his life. The judge didn't look swayed. He read from the paperwork slowly. Then came his words. This court finds sufficient evidence of deliberate identity fraud. Given the pattern, duration, and total amount of financial damage, we move to proceed with formal sentencing. Jason's jaw dropped. Alyssa gasped and covered her mouth like she was the victim. But I didn't move, because that moment wasn't just a legal win, it was a reckoning. They'd stolen over $40,000 in services and credit. Their actions had nearly ruined my ability to refinance my home. They'd left me vulnerable, suspicious of my own instincts, and afraid to answer my own phone. And now? Now, they were going to face consequences, real ones. Outside the courtroom, Alyssa's boyfriend tried to confront me. "You really couldn't handle it privately?" he sneered. "You needed to drag your family into court?" I looked him square in the eyes. "No, honey, I dragged the thieves into court. Family doesn't do what they did." He didn't respond, just stormed off. I stood on those courthouse steps, coat buttoned tight, head held higher than I had in months. The sun broke through the clouds just a little, and the wind calmed. It wasn't over, not yet. But justice had finally begun. And I was far from done reclaiming what they took from me. Not just money, but dignity, safety, and the right to trust my own voice again. It's a strange thing, how everyone wants to call after the storm has passed. After the court date, after the news of the charges spread through the family like wildfire, my phone didn't stop ringing. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Church friends, even Jason's estranged father called, pretending to check on me while trying to figure out just how deep his son had sunk. I kept it short with all of them. I didn't need sympathy from people who weren't there when it mattered. But one call stayed with me. It was my old friend Maggie from back when we worked together at the post office. She'd retired 5 years before me and moved to a small place out in Arizona. "Barbara," she said, "I saw the article online. That's a hell of a thing. So, what are you going to do now?" At first, I didn't know how to answer. I'd spent so much time bracing against the damage, fixing my credit, closing accounts, going through court, that I hadn't stopped to imagine what came next. What does a 67-year-old woman do after being betrayed by the very people she called family? I sat with that question for days. And then I started to write. Not just in my journal, but properly, my story, beginning to end. I reached out to a local victims support group that met twice a month at the community library on Reynolds Road. The first time I spoke, my hands shook. But by the third meeting, I stood tall and said everything out loud. What they did, how, it made me feel how long it took for me to believe that I wasn't crazy. One woman, a retired teacher, cried when I finished. "My son forged my name for a car loan," she whispered. "Everyone told me to let it go. That family forgives." Forgiveness. That word gets thrown around like a warm blanket, but sometimes it's just another way of telling women to stay silent, to absorb damage quietly, to put others' comfort above our own justice. I wasn't doing that anymore. I started volunteering at the library, helping older folks set up account protections, learn how to spot fraud, freeze credit lines. I helped a man named Calvin block his daughter from draining his Social Security payments. I taught a woman named Ruth how to use two-factor authentication on her bank app. And every time someone thanked me, I thought, they tried to take everything from me. But instead, they gave me something back. Purpose, power, a voice I hadn't used in years. Jason and Alyssa ended up taking a plea deal. Community service, probation, restitution. The judge required them to pay me back over time. Small monthly payments I doubt I'll ever fully collect, but that part doesn't matter now. Because I didn't do this for the money. I did this for the girl I used to be, the one who always stayed quiet to keep the peace, the one who was too afraid to speak up when someone crossed a line, the one who thought being good meant being silent. Not anymore. Now I speak. And when Maggie called again a few weeks later, I told her, "I think I'm going to teach a class." She laughed. "Teach them what?" "How to burn down a lie," I said, and walk away stronger than ever. It's been 10 months since I made that first police call. 10 months since I opened a mailbox full of lies and realized the people I loved most had built their lives using my name like it was free property. Sometimes I still wake up angry. It hits me in the quiet moments, the way Jason used to call me Aunt B so sweetly, the way Alyssa hugged me on my birthday and asked if I needed help with anything, how convincing they were, how easy it was for them to smile while emptying me out. But other mornings, I wake up lighter, because justice, even in small doses, is heavier than guilt and more satisfying than silence. I had dinner last week with my neighbor's daughter, Rachel, who recently went through something similar. We sat on my porch, sipping tea as cicadas chirped in the background. She asked me, "How do you forgive someone who doesn't think they did anything wrong?" And I told her the truth. You don't. You outgrow them. Jason and Alyssa still live in town. I see them sometimes from a distance, at the grocery store, the gas station. They never approach, they never say a word. Because they know I didn't just take legal action. I took back everything they built on the foundation of my kindness. They used my credit, my name, my trust, like a stolen coat they thought I'd never miss. But the coat doesn't fit anymore. I'm not that version of myself, the one who gave without question, who smiled through being taken advantage of, the one who thought love meant sacrifice with no boundaries. No, now I love differently. I love with limits, and I protect what's mine, whether that's my bank account, my name, or my dignity. I never raised my voice through any of this. Never went to Facebook and aired it all out. I didn't scream. I didn't throw fits or show up at their door. I built my case. I called the police. I let the system do what it was built to do. And when the verdict came, and the paperwork was signed, and the lies fell apart in a cold courtroom under fluorescent lights, I just smiled. I smiled at the life they could have had if they hadn't betrayed me. I smiled at the woman I'd become, stronger, sharper, louder in all the right ways. And I smiled because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks away quietly, holding everything.